Hello everyone, welcome to task for today, TFT-26 on Yogendra Singh. Today's TFT is a bit tough because, as is the opinion among all the aspirants, that modernization of Indian tradition is one of the most difficult topics of paper 2. So I will try my best to explain this concept in a simple manner, but even if you do not understand any part or if you have any further queries, please do not hesitate to contact me on the group. Let's begin with a small introduction. We know that sociology is the study of structure and change. So when we think of Indian society, the Indian sociologists also try to study Indian social structure as well as the changes which take place in Indian society. Now when we think of Indian society, then the changes came not only through external forces or from external sources, but also these changes came from within or within the society. Yogendra Singh, he studied social structure as well as change of Indian society, and he studied the forces which were internal as well as external. The internal forces are known as endogenous forces, while the external forces are known as exogenous forces. He wrote a book known as Modernization of Indian Tradition, where he explained what all he observed about Indian society. When we think of tradition, what do we understand by tradition? Every society, civilization has a particular tradition. It is not something unique to India, but every society of the world has a particular tradition. What do we understand by tradition then? By tradition, we are referring to certain value themes which are present in the entire society. So if we are considering Indian society, then these value themes will be present or permeate through all the different social structures of Indian society. Only then can we say that it is a tradition of Indian society. If this tradition or these values are present only in a few structures, then we will not call them tradition. But when they are present in more than 2 or 3 social institutions, or we have been observing them over a period of time, then we say that this tradition belongs to a nation or a society or a civilization. For Indian society, we had 4 features. First one was hierarchy, second one was holism, third was continuity, and the fourth was transcendence. Now you should understand that these features or value themes, they were present in other elements of Indian social structure also. That is why they came to be known as the tradition of Indian society. If they were not present in other elements of social structure, then they would not be called as tradition. The first point was hierarchy. We see hierarchy everywhere, but what happened to the tradition of Indian society before modernization or before the Britishers came to India? Indian society was divided into 4 occupational levels: Brahmin, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras. Each one or each category was allowed only one particular occupation. Movement between different levels was not allowed. There were different restrictions regarding marriage, fooding. These were based on the Varna system. Thus, hierarchy was present in the Varnas of Indian society. What other structures showed this feature of hierarchy? These 3 structures were Guna, Ashramas and Purusharth. By Gun, we understand it is a Hindi word, any speciality, any unique feature, any quality. So, charisma, it refers to features of a personality, and these four varnas, they were associated with different guna or charismatic endowments. For example, the Brahmins, they were thought of as bright and they were associated with the guna of sattva, whereas the Shudras, they were referred to as dull and they were associated with tamas. Tamas means darkness, right? So this varna system percolated in this guna also. The next hierarchy was seen in ashramas. These refer to the life stages and value obligations. So we have read about these ashramas. They are brahmacharya, grahastha, vanaprastha and sannyasa. So these also were like a hierarchy. Similarly, there were goal orientations or purushartha, and they were also divided into 4 levels, and they were dharma, artha, kama, moksha. So the hierarchy feature was present not only in the gunas, but it was present in purushartha as well as in the different ashramas. The second point was holism. What do we understand by holism? By holism, we mean that the individual is superseded by the community. That means community is more important than the individual. Community is also known as Sangha. So for the Indian society, when we considered the relationship between the individual and his community, his or her community, then always the community would rule over the individual. What does this mean? It means an individual had to perform certain rights and duties for the benefit of the community. What could this community be? It could be a village, family, caste, political territory or nation. The third quality was continuity. We know about karma. That means whatever you do, you will be rewarded or punished according to your karma. So it is a continuous cycle. Similarly, when we speak of transmigration of soul, that means it shows that there is no break. What happens when someone dies? The soul gets transmigrated. There is a continuity. There is no break. And then when we consider change, then cause may lead to certain effect, and this effect may further lead to the cause. So this is a cyclical view of change. This was also a feature of Indian society. The fourth feature was transcendence. What do we understand by transcendence? When we transcend, it means we go beyond our earthly existence, material existence. So what lies beyond this? The philosophy of transcendence tells us that there are certain values which are traditional and which may not be explained by rationality, but they are sacred, we cannot question them, and it is kind of a super concept because it provides an integration of the society and it integrates various structures of society. So in the Hindu society, also in the Indian society, Hinduism showed traits of transcendence or a north earthly existence. But these features that we talked about, that means hierarchy, holism, continuity and transcendence, it can be found in any other tradition also, in any other civilization also. So what makes a tradition unique? What makes the Indian society unique? the uniqueness of any tradition is defined by its social heritage, that means customs and behavior, then existential situation, which means human existence in the context of social norms, and finally historicity of circumstances, which means that a civilization developed through history, patterns, customs, traditions. There was an evolution of this over a period of time, and every tradition has a unique social heritage, existence of human beings along with a history. Indian tradition is a heterogeneous tradition because it consists of people of different caste, creed, ethnic background. Therefore, when the forces of modernization came to India, came to a heterogeneous social entity, then what happened? What happens when the forces of modernization act on a heterogeneous society? How do they act and what is the result? Is the result a homogeneous entity, or what is the effect of modernization on each element of this heterogeneous society? So how does this change happen? How does modernization act on a heterogeneous society? When we think of the traditional institutions of India, what happened when modernization came to India? The result was that the social institution or traditional institution, the form remained the same, but the substance changed. So, for example, if we are considering the joint family system, then we cannot say that under modernization joint family system vanished. No, joint family system was still there, but the basic structure of a joint family system changed. Maybe the earlier joint family system was more wide, there were more branches, there were more number of families in a joint family system. And in today's world or under modernization, even though there was a joint family system, yet the number of families reduced. So there was a basic change in the nature of the traditional social institutions, even though the form remained the same. As mentioned before, social change happens either through exogenous changes or endogenous changes. Exogenous changes, it happens under the influence of heterogenetic forces or external forces. So when we think of the external forces under the influence of which India changed or Indian society changed, then we can think of two forces. They were Islam as well as the West. Firstly, if we look at the history of Indian society or history of Indian civilization, then we know that we were under the influence of Islamism before the British. So what happened when Islam came to India? Islamic tradition had certain dissimilarities with the Indian tradition. When we think of hierarchy, the Islamic tradition had no place for hierarchical differentiation of individuals. Then, on transcendence, the Islam professes faith of one God. It is a monotheistic religion, contrary to Hinduism. And when we consider holism, then in Hinduism, the community is more important than the individual. But in Islam, this society or community is driven by God. So an individual is under the subordination of God. On these three areas, Islamism differed with Hinduism. So what happened when we were under the influence of Islamic rule? How did the Islamic tradition affect the Indian tradition or the Hindu tradition? When we came under the forces of Islamism, then many caste Hindus or the lower castes, they converted to Islam, and because of this reason, the caste hierarchy was accepted by Islam. So even though previously Islam did not have any hierarchy, did not have any caste structure, but because many Hindu castes, especially the lower castes, when they converted to Islamism, then this caste hierarchy became a feature of Islam also. Another change which was seen was in the political order. Many Hindu norms were accepted by the Islamic society, for example, the feudal monarchical system. So instead of the Hindu tradition being changed by the Islamic tradition, it was the other way around, and the Islamic tradition changed as a result of contact with the Hindu tradition, and there was a kind of synthesis, a fusion of Hindu and Islamic tradition. And this synthesis reinforced the traditional structure of Indian society. So the traditions were strengthened. They were not weakened by the advent of Islam in India. So what was the consequence? There was an amalgamation or fusion, and this amalgamation took place in cultural as well as institutional areas, and there was no major breakdown. Instead, the two traditions, Hinduism and Islamism, they fused. Thus, from the viewpoint of modernization, the Islamic contact was tradition reinforcing, tradition strengthening, and there was no radical transformation by the coming of Islam. Now, we read before that the forces of social change can be divided into two types: endogenous and exogenous changes. Endogenous changes are internal changes, while exogenous changes are external changes. Internal forces, they bring orthogenetic patterns, or they strengthen orthogenetic patterns, while external forces, they lead to some heterogenetic changes. But what happened when Islam came to India? We did not undergo modernization. Instead, what happened? Traditionalization happened, because Islam, if we consider it as a force of change, then it was not possessing the feature of an exogenous force. So the Islam religion or Islam tradition acted like an endogenous force, and thus it strengthened our traditions which were already there. But this did not happen when the British came to India. When the British came to India, we underwent modernization. We will study after reading a few concepts. First concept is about little and great traditions. What do we understand by little tradition? Little tradition is that tradition which is followed by unlettered peasants or the lower class people, or illiterate people. Okay, they are unrecorded and they are usually transmitted orally. How? By folk artists, medicine men, tellers of riddles, proverbs, stories, poets and dancers. They are confined to only a limited sphere. For example, there are little traditions of Telangana. Examples are Bonalu and Bathukama. But what is a great tradition? It is a tradition which is upheld by the elite or the reflective few. Reflective means intellectuals. This tradition is in the form of classical text or scriptures. It is transmitted through teachers, reciters or ritual leaders, and its scope is wide. Example, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. These concepts of little and great traditions, they were given by Robert Redfield and they influenced Milton Singer and McKim Marriott. Now what happens when traditionalization happens or when traditions of a society are strengthened? They happen through endogenetic or endogenous forces. These are also known as orthogenetic process. So what happens here? There are two forms of traditionalization. One is universalization and second is parochialization. When the elements of the little tradition, they are assimilated or they are taken by the great tradition, then the process is known as universalization. So elements of the little tradition, indigenous customs, deities and rites, they circulate upward to the level of the great tradition and they are identified with its legitimate forms. This process is also known as Sanskritization. But what happens when the traditions of the great traditions or the features or rites or customs of great tradition, they are diluted or they are changed a bit in order to form a part of the little tradition? When this happens, the process is known as desanskritization or parochialization. So some elements of the great tradition, they circulate downward to become organic part of the little tradition and they lose much of their original form in the process. So here little tradition is traveling to the great tradition, it is becoming a part of great tradition, whereas some features of great tradition, they are modified and they are a part of the little tradition. For example, the Juang tribes of Keonjhar. Now, next comes modernization, that is the effect of the British rule on Indian society. Before understanding what happened when British came to India, we should understand what was their tradition, what was the Western tradition. When we came in contact with the West, at that time the West had already undergone the process of social change through industrial revolution as well as social reformation. We remember French Revolution, Industrial Revolution. So all these revolutions, they had affected the Western tradition and they broke down the elements of feudalism, they broke down the whole of the church, and a new form of denomination or Christianity was born, which was known as Protestantism. Thus, when India came in contact with the British had features of capitalism, it had features of secularism, it had a new denomination, it also was in favor of liberty, fraternity, equality. So all these values came to India. when the British came to India, especially the rulers and the administrators, because they had already undergone social change, they wanted to change Indian society also. Why? Because they were colonial masters and they wanted their colony to be able to govern easily. What did the British think of Indian society on coming in contact with us? There were few people or few Orientalists. They were overwhelmed by the Indian tradition, but there were other people also, the missionaries and the administrators. They noticed only the contrasts which Indian society presented with respect to the Western society. What was this contrast? They saw Indian society as discrete, plural tradition. What did it include? Caste, subcaste, tribes. So when they thought of their own society, they thought that they were homogeneous. But the Indian society was heterogeneous. It had so many castes, so many subcastes, tribes, and they wanted to bring modernization to Indian society. They wanted to bring a universality to the Indian society. So what did they do for this? They started creating networks of social structure, and these networks were not only modern but pan-Indian. That means they had a national character. What happened in this process of modernization? Initially, when the Indians or Indian society came in contact with the British society or British tradition, then the change was seen only in the little tradition of India. It was seen through the process of westernization. And finally, this change traveled to the great tradition also. How did this happen? In the little tradition, we remember there were a small group of interpreters, trader come middlemen. They started accepting the westernized ways. They were being socialized to Western ways. They accepted the Western ways, and thus a change was seen in the little tradition. We have read about little tradition. It is a change or it is a tradition of a small group of people on a local scale. So the change was seen only in this small group of people. But what happened? Gradually, all these changes were accepted, assimilated in the Indian society. What were these changes? They were cultural norms, Western modes of learning. How did this happen? Through different social movements, social reform movements, by the Brahmo Samaj or Pratna Samaj. There was also a crusade against vagueness in Indian traditions. So people started questioning Indian or Hindu traditions. And finally, because of these social reform movements, along with the strengthening of British power, modernization traveled to the great tradition. So, how did the change happen? It started with little tradition of middlemen, translators or interpreters, and then gradually it traveled to the great tradition with the help of social reform movements and also because of British power. But what happened? in this modernization. What do we understand by modernization? Where do we see modernization? We see modernization in the form of universalistic legal system, Western form of education, urbanization and industrialization, new means of transport and communication, these were national in character, and social reforms. So all these showed that India was modernizing. There were also structural changes. These happened in bureaucracy, army. These happened in business elite or entrepreneurs. There was an emergence of political elite. A nationalist leadership also emerged. Because of entrepreneurs, an industrial working class emerged. Also trade unions organized on corporate lines. So these structural changes also happened under modernization. And these structures had a uniform character. And later on they were responsible for sowing the seeds of nationalism. But what were the drawbacks? There were few drawbacks of modernization under the colonial rule. The modernization process was selective and segmental. It did not travel to each structure or each part of Indian society. It was not integrated with the microstructures of Indian society like family, caste, village community. Why? Because the British, after the revolt of 1857, had pledged that they would not interfere in these microstructures. That is why they did not take any measure to change the original structures of family, caste or village community. They assumed that these microstructures, they were static and they were autonomous, so they will not affect the nationalist character of social change. They made changes only at the macro level, at the national level. They did not make changes at the grassroots level. And there were few measures which strengthened the concept of tradition of Indian society. They were the recruitment of clerks on the basis of caste and ethnicity. These encouraged the feelings of casteism, ethnicity or ethnic identity. They also later on introduced a communal electorate system. This also strengthened the communal feelings. So, even though they were making changes at the national level, yet they were also encouraging traditional feelings, or they were encouraging the strengthening of traditionalism because of these measures, as a result of which in the Indian society tradition grew along with modernization, and this feature was seen in the freedom movement. But what happened after independence? Did we continue with the process of modernization which the British had initiated, or did we change this process of modernization? After the British left India, we changed the process of modernization of India. We adopted a development strategy which not only included macro structures, but they also included micro structures of family, village, caste. Therefore, we ensured that there was no discontinuity between macro structures and micro structures, or between little and great traditions, which was there during the British times. What did we do for this? We introduced adult suffrage. We also introduced a federal parliamentary form of political structure. We included the states. We included democratic decentralization in our polity. We also introduced legal reforms in Hindu marriage inheritance laws. Thus, we changed the traditional family structure. We also came up with community development programs. So we encouraged development at the grassroots levels. We also changed the land reforms, and we ensured that there would be no oppression to the lower levels or people who were working in the agricultural sector. We ensured that they were also brought under development. We also introduced elective village panchayats. Thus we encouraged development or governance at the grassroots level. Therefore, we changed or introduced changes in the modernization process which was introduced to us by British. So, when we speak of modernization of Indian tradition, although the British started the modernization process, yet after independence, we made a number of changes which ensured the inclusion of all sections of people, the inclusion of all the structures of Indian society in this process of modernization. So we ensured that this modernization was inclusive, or which ensured inclusion. Thus, this brings us to the end of today's TFT or task for today. The source to be referred is Modernization of Indian Tradition by Yogendra Singh. You have to read chapters 1 and 7, especially chapter 7 you have to read, and in chapter 1 please read Little and Great Traditions. That is all for today. If you have any queries, please post them in our group Brainstorming Sociology, and we hope that you have learned about Yogendra Singh, about modernization of Indian tradition in today's TFT. We wish you all the very best for the coming TFTs. All the best. Thank you.